I'm Alison from Bag Lady Bird Learn to Sew. Today we're going to be sewing a knit neckband. So whether you're sewing knit or jersey fabric, the key to getting a really professional look is having your neckband sit flat. So I'm going to show you how. Okay, so sewing a knit neckband, the first thing you want to do is to sew your short ends together. Seam the short ends. So with your regular seam allowance, whatever it is for that pattern, you want to sew. Voila. Okay, so now we're going to press this neckband in half all the way around like so. Wrong sides together, so the seam is tucked in. Okay, so once your neckband is folded in half, pressed in half, you want to identify 4 key points on the neckband. So the easiest one is where the seam is, and that becomes your centre back. You can, dependent on dependent on yourself really, you can do that on a shoulder seam if you want to. I find it hides under my hair much better at the back, so not that it matters because it's only a seam, it's not obvious. Then if you fold your neckband in half that way, your next point will be directly opposite that, and that becomes your centre front. Okay, so then if you fold it in half that way, so you match up your markings for centre front and centre back, and you can then find the point halfway between that, so that then becomes one of your quarter points. So basically you want to mark each quarter. Once you've done so, it helps you put the neckband into the neckline. So there we go, we've got the 4 points on that. So this neckband that I'm doing is approximately 2 centimetres wide when it's folded in half. So we've got a 1 centimetre seam allowance, which will leave us, well, it's probably actually 2.5 centimetres wide. 1 centimetre seam allowance will leave us about a centimetre and a half or 5/8 neckband standing up. The narrower your neckband, the easier it is to get it to lay flat. So this is probably a nice manageable one. Anything narrower than this will also be easy. Anything wider than this, you may struggle to get it to lay flat without having a lot of stretch in your neckband. Now, the stretch in your neckband, if you use a neckband or use a ribbon or a cuffing instead, you can. They usually have more stretch and more recovery, so it's easier to curve it around. So you can see already, without me stretching that significantly around that lower edge, the top edge won't lay flat. So that's the kind of theory behind putting in a neckband and having it lay flat, is stretching the lower edge that's sewn into the seam enough so that the top edge, the folded edge, will lay flat against your body. Okay, so now we're looking at the neckline here, and we're going to find the centre front and the centre back. So I haven't previously marked that, so we'll just line up the shoulder seams here and make sure they're matching. Place a pin in the centre back, keeping your shoulder seams lined up. We now want a pin in the centre front, and then, like we did with the neckband, you bring those two together and then you want to find the midway point between them. Now this is slightly trickier because the midway point is not your shoulder seam, not unless you've got a neckline that is equal on the front and the back. This one is a scoop neck at the front, so it's lower, and normally you would find that the front is lower on a neckband anyway. So we're bringing these, you're just not stretching the fabric at all, just letting it evenly find its midway point. So once we have all these 4 points identified, it is now a case of lining up the parts. So we've got a centre back and a centre back lined up here. You can pin those together. So at this stage it's easier to use pins because pins are much more accurate than clips. So then we'll just work our way around the neckband and around the neckline, lining up each subsequent pin and quarter point, making sure we don't twist the neckband, because that would be annoying if you tried to sew it on and it was twisted. So you're lining up your raw edges and you're lining up your pins. Got the last quarter point here to match up. Okay, so I've got this lined up on the machine at just less than 3/8 of an inch. So we want it to be more or less almost there, but we don't want it to be exactly 3/8 or 1 centimetre, so that when we come to sew it for real, that we'll be covering up our basting stitches. So I've just set this on the longest stitch length and we're sewing around, so I'm just making sure all the raw edges are matched up and that I am just stretching the fabric slightly as I sew. Remembering that the point that matches up does not want to be the raw edge, it wants to be the part where the seam is sewn. Make sure your shoulder seams lay flat as well. This is prepping it all for sewing in place. And around now to the centre back. You can see I'm pulling it so it's straight, so I'm sewing it in a straight line, even though it's around a curve. Just helps, that's what you're going to do when you're sewing around a curve on an overlocker. So when you can do that on your sewing machine, you should do it as well. So we're all the way around. Okay, so we've got a neckband that sits nice and flat on a mannequin, also on my body. So I'm now going to overlock this. Okay, so I'm going to put the needles into up position, lift my presser foot here. I am just going to cut a little shape out of this. So because it's all basted in place, I know where I need to be stitching is just beyond the basted stitch line. So I'm just going to cut this because this will be the amount we need to trim off to get the correct seam allowance. I'm then going to place this under the needles. So that cut edge that I have just cut will then line up with the knife, and we're just going to be trimming that little bit off all the way around as we sew. Bring the needles, just going to lift it a little further. That's it. So you can see the knife now is just getting to that edge. And I'm just checking the bit that I'm coming to is flat before I get to it. So just sort of an inch at a time. And just working my way around. I've started coming too far out and not hitting the stitches. I'm not quite at the right position. It's difficult because the camera's slap bang where my head wants to be. So you can get the best view. I'm working on, I'm just making sure that it sits straight and flat before it comes anywhere near the knife, and obviously before it comes anywhere near the needle. Back round to where I started, chopping off as I go, and then coming along here, and I want to actually come here so I can chop off, or not chop off, but sew over these basting stitches because we want to be slightly beyond them. So I'm just trimming off the edge of these as we sew. And then once we're back around to meet where we want to be, needles down, lift your presser foot and pull your fabric out at a right angle, and then just allow your stitches to sew straight off the edge. And then this is where we just want to pull out your needle stitches, so your needle threads, which are the two straight ones that run up through the looper threads, and then you can bring those out, pull those out, and it will release the loopers, and you can tie in a knot and trim. Okay, so I have pressed the neckline so that the seam allowance goes towards the body of the bodysuit, and I am going to now do a row of top stitching around here. I like to do it with the triple stitch. It goes forwards and back, just gives a really neat row of top stitching around this edge. I would do this whether I'm sewing a neckline with the overlocker or with the regular sewing machine. It just, to me, finishes off and makes it look really neat and professional without the need of any special machines, whatever. So I'm just making sure with my hands that this all sits nice and neat, and then off we go. Sewing. So I'm going to sew all the way around here with this stitch. So I've got this row of top stitching now around the neckline, sitting a little bit wavy, but that will be rectified. I'm just going to steam it now. Now I have pressed this with a lot of steam, and that brings back in, it shrinks back any stretched out fibres of the elastic, the elastane that's in the fabric. So that is the neckband done. So there we go.